You are listening to How to Get Over Your Ex, episode number 201, When It Feels Like the End. Welcome to How to Get Over Your Ex, a podcast on getting over your ex without it just taking time. I'm your host, Breakup Coach Dorothy. Let's turn your pain into power and your heartbreak into happy. Hello, beautiful brave hearts. How are you doing? I love you so much. I hope you're having an amazing day. I recently wrote a newsletter, and it was kind of titled Breakups and Bullies, and I wanted to share a little bit more about it here. I am actually at the end of this month going to my hometown, which is called International Falls, Minnesota, for a dear friend's wedding, and I have not been to my hometown, you guys, forever, since like 2019. I haven't been there with my 3 girlfriends for even longer, like over 10 years. I think it was 2010 when all 3 of us were home together. So it feels like that was a totally different lifetime. Like I think that I'm finally getting into the age where there are like pockets of time in my life that feel like they were literally a different version of myself. I remember in middle school, so as I've been thinking about going home, I've been remembering middle school and high school. They were the same thing. We had grades 7 through 12 all in the same building. And it was kind of, I don't really have great memories of it, to be quite honest. I was bullied in high school. It wasn't even that I felt like, I wouldn't say that I was popular. I definitely didn't feel popular, but I was friends with a lot of different groups. Like I liked the people in band, and I liked the sporty people, and I felt like friends with everyone. But there was this one girl in my high school that made my life literally miserable. And I remember feeling so small and so scared, and I was constantly anxious and afraid. And at the time, I didn't even know what those feelings were. I didn't know that I was experiencing anxiety and fear. All I knew was that I just didn't want to go to school, and then I was always constantly worried about what people said and about what I was saying or what I was doing. And I was always asking my friends, even like close friends, if they were mad at me. Like I desperately wanted to be liked, and I was terrified of people not liking me. And I was constantly asking for reassurance and validation and wondering if they liked me. Did I do something wrong? Are you mad at me? And there was this one girl who would constantly threaten to kick my ass. And looking back now, I'm just like, poor girl. Where, the person who was bullying me, where in the world did she even learn the statement, kick my ass, from? That was not a saying that was thrown around my home. And she just threw it out like it was nothing. And I did not take it lightly. I believed her at face value. I was truly scared to go to school. And she eventually left her high school, and I was able to go to the college for the rest of my high school, and I felt much safer without her being there. But long story short, I just remembered this feeling of, this is the end of my life. I hated it. I just felt like this was the end. Everything was over. It was as if everyone in our high school learned something about you, or if you did something embarrassing, like the whole world knew. It felt like there was a billion people who knew what happened and, were judging you, when really there was only 100 people in my class. And when I moved away to go to college, it was the best thing ever. I literally left. I didn't even leave just the state. I moved to the other side of the country. I grew up at the top of Minnesota, which is next to Canada, and I moved all the way to the bottom of the country in Florida. And when I did that, it was the ultimate reinvention. It is so much easier and so much more fun to reinvent yourself in a new place that is filled with people who do not have preconceived ideas of who you are from your past. And you can come up to, I just noticed that you can come up to a lot of resistance to change when you're trying to change kind of who you are and what you're doing in the world in front of others who've known you for a while, good or bad. It reminded me of when I started to become a breakup coach when I was living in Chicago, and I told the people that I worked with that I was working to become a coach. They laughed and they giggled and they thought it was funny that I thought I could even make a living doing this full time. Whereas when I moved to Boston and I just told people I was a breakup coach, they accepted that. They saw me in this new realm and they saw me as a breakup coach, not as a data analytics consultant with a side hustle of a breakup coach. So I just find that really fascinating. Anyways, I digress. I was thinking about this 13-year-old version of me a lot lately, and what would I have told her if I could go back when she was dealing with this bully? I don't even recognize the 13-year-old version of me. It's crazy. I wish I could just hug her. She's so cool. But what I realized is what I would tell her is that, Dorothy, you are so ahead of your time. And one of my favorite quotes that my ex-boyfriend Matthew gave me was, "You're just too radical for their simple mind." And he mentioned it in the statement of like my ex, of like, you're just too radical for his simple mind, which felt very true. As I dive into coaching and things, isn't it funny that the more you learn that thoughts create feelings and you start learning about self-help and consciousness and all of this stuff, all of a sudden you realize there's like two groups of people you hang out with. At least for myself, I hang out with coaches and I hang out with like, I want to use the word like muggles, which sounds really terrible, but I don't mean it in a bad way. It's just individuals who are living in the world as their sim character, as the human being that they are, versus recognizing that they're a soul in this world and they don't know that thoughts create feelings and all of this stuff. So it's very interesting now as I move through this. But anyways, long story short, I would have told this 13-year-old version of myself, Dorothy, you are ahead of your time. You are just too radical for this individual's simple mind, and really too radical for even some adults. I got in so much trouble sometimes for just having my own thoughts and solving problems in different ways and not just learning rote memorization and taking it at face value. I would question things a lot and I would get in trouble for it. And noticing that part of me, that radical part of me that's ahead of her time, that part of you is not bad. It's just different, and you will find your people. I wish I could have said that to her then, because she felt so alone and so isolated. The second thing is that the person bullying you, Dorothy, is actually hurting and maybe jealous. She's reacting to her emotions, which you're going to get lots of experience doing, and she's projecting, and it literally has nothing to do with you and everything to do with her. Now, there might have been adults in my life who told me that about her. I believe that there probably were, and I just can't recall or remember, right? But I wish that I could rewind and say, hey, girlfriend, you are going to have so much experience reacting with your emotions, so please know that you're not alone in this experience, and this girl's hurting too. And that doesn't excuse her behavior, but we can have a little bit of compassion. The third thing is your life is not dependent on that bully. Literally, you will go 20 plus years without seeing her or talking to her ever again. I have not seen her or talked to her in so long. And she will have a life that you are actually glad you're not a part of. I have no desire to have any aspect of her life. I also have no desire to be a part of her life in any way, shape, or form. Not even a little. The fourth thing is that this bully is actually pushing you closer to what you want by showing you what you don't want. What? And that doesn't make her right in what she's doing, but it is clear to you now that this is not what you want in your life. This is not what you want in your life, which is so interesting. And I wish I could have told myself that back then, because I so badly wanted to be a part of her group and a part of her kind of clan. And it almost she's like the ringleader of something. And I wanted to be a part of it, even though she was just so mean. The fifth thing and the last thing that I wish I could tell my 13-year-old self is that This is not the ending of your life, sister. You are so young. This is just the beginning. This world you're living in right now is so ridiculously small. Ridiculously small. You are in a school where you have a class of 100 people. Your town is tiny. And you are about to be known by millions of people and accepted and loved and cherished and supported by millions of human beings. What? And this is just the beginning. We're just getting started. 13-year-old me, I was legitimately just getting started. Now, the reason I'm sharing all of this with all of you is that there is a correlation between breakups and bullies. Here's what breakups and bullies have in common. All of these statements that I made to my 13-year-old self, all of the things that I'd tell her, I would also say to you and or myself about a breakup, right? Number one, you're too radical for his simple mind, and that's not a problem, right? Number two, your ex is hurting and maybe jealous and reacting to their emotions and projecting, and that literally has nothing to do with you. What your ex does has literally nothing to do with you. Your ex breaking up with you or leaving or cheating has nothing to do with you and a thought error on their side and has everything to do with them. Number three, your life is not dependent on your ex. Your life is not dependent on your ex, which leads me to number four of your ex is actually pushing you closer to what you do want by showing you what you don't want. And that is clear. And you're actually going to realize that maybe you want a life that looks very different than the one that you had with your ex. And lastly, this breakup or this divorce is not the ending of your life. It is just the beginning. The world that you're living in might seem like everything to you, but it is actually extremely small. It is actually extremely small. Isn't that even crazy to think about? Because sometimes I think our world feels real because we're so dropped into it. But I don't know if you've ever noticed when you go travel, you're like, damn, barely scratched the surface. There's so many humans. There's so many environments. There's so many ecosystems that I could be a part of that have nothing to do with my ex that I actually love and find fascinating and enjoy. But just like when we were in high school or middle school, we feel like our high school or our middle school was just everything. And it was like a bubble of the world that we were supposed to be in. We think that's everything. We think we need to be there. But really, there's this whole big world out there that you might even actually like better. Now, here's the problem. When we are going through a breakup or divorce, no matter the length, some of you are going to tell me it's different for 20-year marriages versus a 2-month situationship, but I see it across the board, is that we forget that there is no actual end. Hang with me for a second. That really we're only just getting started. There is a new chapter happening, that the world is not as small as it feels. It really never ends. Just soak that in for just a second. It never really ends. If we are infinite souls, we are always going. And if you don't believe in souls, it only really ends once we die then. And once we die, it doesn't matter. Otherwise, we just keep reinventing ourselves and creating new lives within this lifetime. It's just new chapters. It's reinventions of ourselves. Isn't that kind of cool to think about? Just because a relationship ends or completes itself in our life doesn't mean it's the ending of your life. It's the beginning of a new reinvention. And so here's what I want you to answer for yourself today, because it's going to be really important to see how this lands with you in your body and figure out what this looks like for you. So the first one is, if this was the beginning, how would you feel and why? Versus you're telling yourself it's the end. How might you be showing up differently, right? Because when we're telling ourselves this is the end of everything, it feels defeating. It feels discouraging, devastating, scary. And we show up that way. We worry, we complain, we blame, we cry, we sit in inaction, we sit in indecision. There's a lack of motivation or excitement. Versus when I think about, wow, this is just the beginning. Just like that 13-year-old self of my own, it's like, wow, that was the beginning of her life. She had 20 plus years in front of herself. That's a whole lifetime in its own. This is just the beginning. And then I feel hopeful and I feel optimistic. Sometimes maybe it's just curious or interested. But all of those feelings kind of fuel the action of looking at and exploring and dreaming and creating and trying new things, testing and trial and error, not beating ourselves up for not getting it right the first time. It's a different energy when we remind ourselves this is the beginning. Just because this relationship completed itself doesn't mean it's the end of everything. It's actually the beginning of everything. The second thing I want you to do is, if this was 13-year-old you, what would you tell him or her? Get this out and write it down as if you were talking to that 13-year-old version of you, whether you were bullied, whether you went through a hard time, like what was it that you went through in middle school or high school that really felt like the end or felt very difficult? And what would you tell that version of yourself now, having coming out of it maybe 5 years, 20 years, 50 years, 60 years, 70 years, wherever you are at in your human timeline? What would you tell that version of you? And then I want you to rewrite it to you now in the present situation, like I did earlier in this episode, right? Rewrite it for your breakup, for your divorce, because all of it still applies. The third thing is, the world is not this small. It may feel really, all-consuming to you, but it's not that big. It's not. When I say that, I'm talking about like the problem is not bigger than your world. I even think about like Taylor Swift, right? So Taylor Swift's got millions of followers. And I just want you to think about, if you're listening, maybe you have millions of followers, I don't know. But even if you did, there's billions of people in the world. Billions. And I've been watching this show called Vanderpump Rules. You guys, oh my gosh, I just have so many thoughts and opinions. But there's a woman on there named Ariana not Vanderpump, but Ariana. She has 2 million followers on Instagram when I looked her up a couple days ago. What I find fascinating is I've just heard of her. There's 2 million people just following on Instagram, let alone people watching the show that don't follow her on Instagram. And yet I just found out about her, and she's been on TV for 10 years. It just like reminds me how big the world actually is. Right? 13-year-old me with 100 students in my class, that felt big. It felt all-consuming. But that was just 100 people. I could have moved to the next town and changed my name and no one would have any idea of my history. And when I travel, like I said earlier, when I travel now, I have a podcast. There's millions of people listening to this podcast. I still could move somewhere and people don't know who I am. I walk into buildings, people have no idea who I am. There are still so many people who don't know of this podcast. So many. And when you start to realize just how big the world is, how many different ecosystems you could live in, it feels less suffocating and scary. Because maybe this close-knit, tight circle, you're going through a lot with the breakup and the divorce, but that's not the end of your life. There's other lives that you could live. You could literally move to a different country and move into an ashram and become a silent Buddha person. You could move to South Africa and become a zoologist. You could move to Antarctica and become an Eskimo. I don't know. I'm literally just like pulling stuff up now, but you can literally go out and live any life, reinvent yourself completely. And after a breakup, after a divorce is like the best time to do it. You might as well. It's all fallen to pieces anyways. You might as well rebuild it into whatever you want. But build it from this place of this is just the beginning, not the end. Okay, I want you to give yourself some time today. If it is feeling like your world just ended, I want you to try on or play with the idea that perhaps it's just begun. It really never ends, and you're just reinventing yourself for the next chapter, the next lifetime you're about to embark on. And it gets to be whatever you want it to be. I want you to ask yourself, one, if it was the beginning, and I knew for certain that it was the beginning, how would I be feeling and what would I be doing? Two, write to your 13-year-old self and then rewrite that according to your current situation for you now. And three, I want you to zoom out and see how big the world is. You could start over anywhere and do anything. All right, my brave hearts, I love you so much. Thank you for tuning into today's episode. If you found this episode helpful, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe to the How to Get Over Your Ex podcast for more episodes like this. And if you found any of our episodes helpful, we would truthfully, really honestly love a written review on the Apple Podcast app to help other heartbroken humans turn their pain into power and their heartbreak into happy. If you're loving the How to Get Over Your Ex podcast and you want to learn how to get over your ex in 3 months or less to build a life better than the one you thought you had with your ex, I would like to personally invite you to my next group course where we take everything you've learned here on the podcast and apply it to your life. Come check it out at www.lifecoachdorothy.com.